It all started on a quiet Sunday morning when I was sipping my coffee on the porch, enjoying the peace and quiet of my own home. That's when I saw her, marching down the sidewalk with a clipboard in one hand and a smug expression on her face. I had seen this woman before, but we had never spoken. She was one of those self-important types, the kind of person who acts like they own the whole world just because they have a little power. She strutted right up to my property and stopped at the edge of my driveway, tapping her foot impatiently. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice dripping with authority she didn't actually have. "You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations, and I'm here to give you notice." I blinked at her, setting my coffee down slowly. "I'm sorry, what?" She huffed, flipping through her clipboard as if she were reading me my rights. "Your backyard shed is not up to HOA standards. Your house needs to be repainted, and you have outstanding HOA dues that must be paid immediately." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. I never joined an HOA." That's when her expression shifted from self-righteous arrogance to condescending amusement. "Oh, you must be mistaken," she said with a fake smile. "This entire neighborhood falls under the HOA's jurisdiction. If you refuse to comply, we will be forced to escalate the matter, and I will personally make sure you regret it." I stood up, my heart starting to pound in irritation. "You do whatever you think you need to do. But I don't answer to you, and I sure as hell don't answer to any HOA. Her smile faltered just for a second before she gave me one last glare and stomped away. I had no idea at the time just how far she would take things. Over the next few weeks, the harassment started. Notices appeared in my mailbox almost daily, letters stamped in bold red ink, claiming I owed thousands in unpaid fines. Apparently, I was now being charged for my unauthorized fence, my non-compliant landscaping, and even the color of my front door. It was absurd. Every time I threw one of those letters away, another would show up more aggressive than the last. Then, people I didn't recognize started showing up on my property. Strangers with measuring tape and cameras, taking notes and snapping pictures like they were building a case against me. One morning, I walked outside to find a bright orange sticker slapped onto my front window. An official-looking notice declaring my property was in severe violation of HOA policies, and that failure to comply would result in further legal action. That's when I knew this wasn't just about me refusing to join an HOA. This was something deeper, something bigger. Someone was trying to push me out. I started digging, talking to some of my neighbors, and what I found was shocking. Karen, the so-called HOA president, wasn't just some well-meaning neighborhood organizer. She was a tyrant. She had been systematically forcing homeowners out for years, making up rules, slapping people with fines, and bullying them until they either gave in or moved away. And when they did move, their houses always ended up being sold to someone she personally approved of, usually for way below market value. A few of my neighbors whispered about how she had connections in real estate, how she somehow always seemed to benefit financially from the people she pushed out. I realized then that I was just her next target. She must have assumed I was an easy mark, another homeowner who would buckle under pressure and leave so she could make a tidy profit off my property. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. Instead of backing down, I decided to fight back. I started doing some digging of my own, going through property records, researching local laws, and pulling up everything I could find about the HOA's legal standing. And that's when I found something very interesting. According to county records, my house wasn't even part of the HOA's jurisdiction. The entire HOA had been operating under a legal gray area, using outdated maps and fake contracts to pressure homeowners into following rules they were never legally bound to obey. I gathered every document I could find and prepared to call in a lawyer. But before I could, Karen escalated things yet again. One evening, I came home to find my power had been cut off. I checked with the electric company, and they told me they had received a request to terminate my service from the HOA. The next morning, I received a certified letter claiming that I was being evicted for non-compliance, and that security would be by to escort me off the premises if I didn't vacate within 72 hours. That was the moment I decided it was time to play my trump card. I went down to the county clerk's office and requested the full property records, not just of my home, but for the entire neighborhood. And that's when I found the bombshell. The land my house sat on, it wasn't just mine. I owned the entire block. Decades ago, before the HOA even existed, the original developer of the land had structured the ownership in a way that gave me legal control over the entire neighborhood's foundation. The HOA had been illegally operating on my property for years without my permission, which meant not only did Karen and her board have zero authority over me, but technically, they should have been paying me for the land they had been using all this time. I didn't just own my house. I owned their entire operation. Armed with this information, I waited. I didn't respond to Karen's fake eviction notice. I didn't acknowledge the ridiculous threats. I just let her dig herself deeper. Then, when the 72-hour deadline came and went, and Karen showed up with her so-called security team to kick me out, I calmly opened the door, stepped onto my porch, and handed her the official property deed. The moment she saw what it was, her smug confidence crumbled. What is this?" she stammered. I folded my arms and looked her straight in the eye. "This," I said, "is proof that you've been illegally extorting homeowners on my land. This entire HOA has been built on property you don't own. That means every fine you've issued, every rule you've enforced, every threat you've made, it's all fraud." Karen's face went pale. Her hands shook as she looked back at her board members, who were suddenly very, very quiet. The so-called security officers she had brought with her looked at each other uneasily. They had come here expecting to throw a man out of his own house. But now, they were realizing they might be part of something illegal. "You have two choices," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "Either you and your corrupt board members dissolve this HOA immediately and repay every cent you've stolen from homeowners, or I take this to court and file a massive lawsuit against you. And trust me, once the media gets a hold of this story, you won't just be losing your position. You'll be facing serious legal consequences." The silence was deafening. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then swallowed hard. She knew she was beaten. The very power she had wielded over others had just vanished in an instant, and as she stood there, clutching the useless eviction notice in her hands, the realization sank in. She had messed with the wrong homeowner. The moment Karen realized she had lost, she tried to backpedal. "Now, hold on," she stammered, her hands tightening around her clipboard as though it would somehow shield her from reality. "There's got to be some mistake here. We've been operating this HOA for years. You can't just walk in and claim you own the land." I took a step forward, locking eyes with her. "That's exactly what I can do," I said firmly. "And if you think I'm bluffing, why don't we take this to court and let a judge decide?" The color drained from her face. She knew that if this went to court, not only would she lose, but she would also be exposed for all the fraudulent fines, illegal evictions, and backdoor real estate deals she had orchestrated. And she wasn't the only one who realized it. The other board members started shifting uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. One of them, a balding man in a cheap suit, stepped forward and cleared his throat. Now, let's not be hasty," he said, forcing a smile. "Surely we can find a way to, resolve this amicably." I crossed my arms, letting them squirm under the weight of their own corruption. They were scrambling, looking for an escape, a way to keep the power they had abused for so long. But there was no escape. "There's only one way to resolve this," I said. "The HOA is dissolved, effective immediately. Every homeowner you scammed gets their money back. Every bogus rule you enforced is wiped out. And if I hear so much as a whisper that you're trying to pull another stunt like this, I will personally make sure you face criminal charges." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew she had no fight left. She had spent years bullying people, threatening them, making them feel powerless. And now, she was a powerless one. But just when I thought the nightmare was over, I received a letter a week later that proved Karen wasn't done playing dirty. The envelope was official-looking, sealed with legal markings. When I opened it, my stomach tightened in disbelief. It was a lawsuit. Karen and a few of the remaining HOA board members were suing me for defamation, claiming that my accusations had damaged their reputation and caused them emotional distress. I actually laughed when I read it. This woman had the nerve to run an illegal HOA on my land, scam people for years, and then sue me because she didn't like getting caught? It was almost comical. Almost. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't about money. This wasn't even about winning. This was Karen's final attempt to control the narrative, to make herself look like the victim so she could slither her way back into power. Well, if she wanted a legal battle, she was about to get one. I hired a lawyer, gathered all my evidence, and prepared to take her down once and for all. The lawsuit dragged on for months, but in the end, the judge saw right through her lies. Not only did she lose the case, but she was also ordered to pay damages for wasting the court's time with a frivolous lawsuit. As she stood in the courtroom that day, humiliated and defeated, I knew this was the end of her reign of terror. With the HOA officially dissolved, the neighborhood began to heal. Homeowners who had been bullied for years finally felt free. No more arbitrary fines, no more ridiculous rules, no more fear of losing their homes over something as trivial as the color of their mailbox. But as the community celebrated, I realized there was still unfinished business. The land I owned, the land Karen and her board had been exploiting for years, was now my responsibility. I had the power to decide what happened next, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Instead of forming another HOA, I formed a committee made up of real homeowners, real people who care about the neighborhood, not about power or control. We created a neighborhood alliance, but unlike the HOA, it was completely voluntary. No fines, no ridiculous rules, just a group of neighbors helping each other out, keeping the community safe, and ensuring that no one would ever be taken advantage of again. It wasn't about power. It was about doing what was right. And as the months passed, the neighborhood thrived like never before. Property values rose, crime dropped, and people actually enjoyed living here again. All because one corrupt woman's grip on the community had been broken for good. But just when I thought I had seen the last of Karen, she reappeared in the most unexpected way. I was at a local diner, enjoying breakfast with some neighbors, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, if it isn't the neighborhood king. I turned around, and there she was, Karen, standing there with a forced smile and a look that was equal parts bitterness and desperation. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said casually, taking a sip of my coffee. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," she said, sliding into the booth across from me like we were old friends. "You really did a number on me, you know that?" Took away everything I built. I set my mug down, studying her. "You didn't build anything, Karen. You stole from people. You bullied them. You manipulated them. And now you're upset because you finally had to face consequences." She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "You think you won? You think you're some kind of hero?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "People like me don't just disappear. You got lucky this time. But power always finds its way back." I met her gaze without flinching. "Not in my neighborhood," I said. And with that, I stood up, left some cash on the table, and walked away. I didn't have time for people like her anymore. I had a neighborhood to take care of. In the end, Karen faded into irrelevance, just like all bullies do when they lose their grip on power. She tried to move to another town, but word about her fraudulent HOA schemes had spread. No one wanted anything to do with her. She lost her influence, her status, and most of all, her control over other people's lives. As for me, I kept living in the neighborhood I had always loved, surrounded by good people who finally felt safe and respected. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for every single person who had ever been bullied, manipulated, or pushed around by someone who thought they were untouchable. And if there was one lesson I learned through all of this, it was this: real power doesn't come from titles, rules, or threats. Real power comes from standing your ground, knowing your worth, and never letting anyone take advantage of you. That's a lesson Karen had to learn the hard way. And something told me she'd be learning it for a long, long time.